This is the Toto Aquia toilet, or at least one of them. This is actually a rare version, which I think is now discontinued. This is a regular Aquia that actually, instead of washing down, it's more like a side flusher in a way. Which means this is pretty much the only version of the Aquias that are actually siphonic. Honestly, this is a pretty interesting toilet, but there is one thing that hinders it, and we'll look at it today. Beginning with the overall design, it's just a weird looking shape. Honestly, I don't really care for this, but this is pretty much a interesting two-piece design, as you can see. Inside the bowl, you got a very interesting shape. As you can see, there's like a shape before the trapway opening, which is quite interesting, but most Aquias do have it. As you can see, the rim jets are pointed down, which does mean that the ball runs isn't great, but you can tell these are pretty large, so most of it does get covered, which is quite cool. My only gripe is that the opening does look a little bit small. This thing has the dual max flushing system, which is a dual flush system, aka what I like to call the pointless button system. You got a button for 0.9 gallons, which I don't know why you want to do that, because the flush is very inefficient, as you'll soon see, and a 1.6, which also still feels a little short. Ideally, there is a way to bypass this, and it's just by holding down the button so the entire tank drains. I never really liked these systems, and I never will. Inside the tank is nothing really to write home about. You got what pretty much looks like a fluid master fill valve, but just rebranded, as you can see. And you have the dual flush system, which, like I say, is very unreliable. And that's just with most dual flush systems in general. The tank itself, besides that, is nothing particularly interesting. Here you got the button system. And here's some general information, I guess, if you need replacement parts. Now let's take a look at some flushes. We'll start with just pressing release in the 0.9 gallon option. You see how very inefficient that flush is for the half option? It's very inefficient, and it doesn't even siphon out all the way. It probably has a pretty terrible pull too, considering how little water is used. Now let's do the full flush, the 1.6 gallon, but we're just going to press and release first. Well, it's a little bit better that way. You can definitely tell it still cuts off a little short. That doesn't even feel like 1.6 gallons, and keep in mind this does not have a siphon jet. Now we're going to hold down the button and get a full flush the proper way, draining the entire tank. See how much better that was? As you saw with the flush, it's pretty much kind of like a side flusher, which is quite interesting. It has a pretty powerful and, I dare say, pretty good flush for what it is. And surprisingly, the siphon seems to be pretty sufficeable, especially for something with no siphon jet. My biggest gripe with this toilet really isn't the toilet itself, but the system. As you saw with just the press and release flushes, they are super unreliable. Even the 1.6 gallon option seems to be very lackluster. I have never cared for these dual flush systems, and this kind of hinders it if you just press and release, meaning you have to hold down the button to get a proper flush. I've never liked doing that at all, even with handle toilets, which I had to do several times with many other models. I just hate pointless systems like this, and I wish they would go away, but considering that this version is discontinued for the washdown version and whatever this abomination is, honestly, it doesn't even really matter anymore. But still, it was something that they should have done when they made this model. Just get rid of the system entirely and just have a proper flushing toilet. For once, without these stupid systems for water saving. Or lack thereof, ironically. Now let's get a look at ball rings and see how it is. like the jets pointing down, I will say the ball actually is not bad. It actually covers most of the area. Especially considering some of the jets are larger, it definitely helps with that fact. That's one thing I like about this. And that is this version of the Toto Aquia toilet. A very interesting toilet held back by a stupid pointless button system. This toilet actually has quite a bit of potential, but at the end of the day, it kind of lags behind due to that system. But let's see how it goes into the grading scale. Let's grade it. The overall design here is trying to go for that fake one-piece design, and honestly, I don't really like how this looks. It's not really the fake one-piece design it's going for, it's just the overall look of it I just don't like. Doesn't really sit right with me, honestly. But to be completely fair, it doesn't look painfully generic or cheap, so I'll give it a 5 at least. There ain't much tank parts to this toilet, but the dual flush system sucks. I don't think this should be a big surprise. A majority of dual flush systems suck, so this is no surprise to anyone. It gets a 3. Ignoring the dual flush system, the quality control overall seems to be perfectly fine, but with the dual flush system in place, pressing and releasing is not going to be a very reliable choice of option. Holding down the buttons doesn't cause any problems, but the dual flush system is what really screws things up here. The quality control itself is fine, it's just the dual flush system that screws it, so it gets a 5. The trapway isn't the greatest design. While you can't really get a good outline, it's probably a generic front flusher trapway. The opening itself is also kind of small for my liking, even though it looks kind of deep. I'm giving a trapway a 4. On the lower end scale, the flush isn't even really a flush. It's literally just dumping water in, because this thing sometimes doesn't even siphon on a press and release 0.9 gallon flush. It's pretty pathetic and it gets a 1. Now the full effect of it, like using the entire tank, the flush is actually pretty good. It's basically a side flush of flush, but it's very powerful and very exciting, ending with a very meaty siphon. It gets an 8.
The pull is often based on gravity, and since the half flush doesn't provide a lot of gravity to even get it to siphon out, you'll be lucky to get a 1. But on the fuller potential, it's still not much better. Relying on only gravity to pull down and siphon out the toilet isn't always the most reliable thing. Therefore, I'll give it a 5.
On the lower end scale of performance, it's a 3. I don't see it being that terrible, but due to the less water usage, I don't think a lot of stuff will be going through. Now on the higher end scale, the performance is fine. There's nothing really wrong with the performance at all despite the trapway size, but compared to some other stuff, it could be a little bit better in terms of performance, but it gets a 6. Considering how little water comes out during the half flush, the ball rinse gets a 2 on the lower end scale. But on the higher end scale, it's not too bad, honestly. Granted, it's not perfect and the rim jets are still angled down, but considering that most of the area is covered, the ball rinse is not all that bad. Maybe some gaps here and there that might be missed, and due to the weird bowl shape, some things could get stuck, but thankfully not as bad as some others. It's alright for what it is, and it gets a 6. In terms of survivability, the Aquia will not last very long on a half-flush basis. It will probably at most get a 3. But on the fuller vintage scale, it's actually not too bad and it might hold its own for quite a little bit. Not amazing by any means, but honestly quite good for what this is, if you reliably use most of the tank or even the full flush for that matter. And I give it a 7 on that scale. Now let's talk about the overall value. On the lower end scale, it's pretty worthless. I don't think I need to go without saying 1 gallon or less is not enough to flush a toilet. And I think this fully proves on the half option that it will be very unreliable. Therefore, it gets a 2. But on the higher end scale, it's not that bad, honestly. This has one of the more unique flushes I've ever seen of a toilet, and the performance is perfectly sufficeable, as well as the ball rinse. That being said though, I think there are some design elements that could have been improved upon, but honestly, it's not too bad. It's far from the worst Toto toilet I've seen, but I kind of wish this was executed out a little bit better, not gonna lie.
I give it a 6 in value. Now for the final scores of the Toto Aquia floor-mounted toilet. On the lower end scale, this gets a 29 out of 100, while on the high end scale, it gets a 55 out of 100. This is a very interesting toilet, especially considering this is from the Aquia line, which is mostly based on washdown toilets. So seeing a siphonic side flusher version of the Aquia is quite interesting. But to be completely honest, there are better toilets out there. If you're just using it for water saving, it's pretty worthless, like a majority of water saving toilets. But if you use 1.6 gallons or higher, it's not that bad, honestly. But to be completely honest, it would be better without that stupid dual flush system.